historians, marine biologists, and cryptozoologists of Reddit. As far as legends in history go, what legendary creature do you believe may have been real and probably existed in some way, or what supposedly legendary person in history was more than likely real? The Lusca, giant octopus. It supposedly lives in the blue holes of the coast of Florida, and the amount of food and temperature of water both support the theory of an octopus living long enough to grow way larger than we expect, based on our current records. Oh man. You want the real gold standard shit on this. You want aboriginal tales from Dreamtime, which in many cases have been proven to be validated records predating the end of the last ice age. They coexisted with megafauna in Australia, and their crypto creatures have literally been linked back to now extinct fauna. And quoting from Wikipedia, Diprotodon optitum is not only the largest species of diprotodonted, but also the largest marsupial that ever existed. Approximately 3 meters, 10 feet long, and 2 meters, 7 feet high at the shoulder, and weighing up to 2,780 kilograms, 6,130 pounds. It resembled a giant wombat. It is the only marsupial known, living or extinct, to have conducted seasonal migration. There are many diseases that the origin of the vampire/vampy myth can be traced back to, however I think rabies fits it the most. In the olden days, people would tie those suspected of it to trees. In about 3 days' time the disease would drastically change them. Extreme light sensitivity, paleness, aggression, excessive drooling. They would try to attack you and have bouts of either extreme slow fatigue or even adrenaline. Also, rabies can be passed from person to person through a bite, not just an infected animal. I regularly get to see pods of humpback whales at the beach where I surf. Most of the time, all you see is their backs as they partially surface from the water. Occasionally, one of them breaches mouth first, so you see a giant mouth emerge from the water. Other times, you see a giant tail emerge. If you were watching them and had no idea what a whale was, or that you were looking at multiple of them, I could easily imagine mistaking multiple whale backs as the coils of a colossal snake. I strongly suspect that this is the origin of legends of sea serpents. While that could be one origin, take a look at the oarfish. I think that might be the more likely origin, as it can grow to absolutely massive sizes. 11 meters the page says is the largest published length, with unconfirmed sightings of up to 17 meters. Chupacabra. It has to be some poor sick animal with mange. Mange is highly contagious, so if a pack of coyotes or wild dogs got it, they would all have a weird ass appearance and attack other animals out of hunger. The Maori people of New Zealand have long told stories of the pauke, a monstrous bird that was big enough to hunt and eat humans. Many believe that these stories are referring to the Haast seagull. It was the largest species of eagle ever to have lived on Earth, with weights of around 30 pounds and wingspans almost reaching 10 feet. It lived on New Zealand's South Island and primarily hunted the flightless moa bird, which weighed around 500 lbs. Given the large size of its main prey, it's likely that the eagle may have also targeted lone humans as well. Interestingly enough, the Haast seagull went extinct around the year 1400, not long after the Maori arrived in New Zealand. It's thought that its extinction can be attributed to habitat destruction combined with the extinction of the moa due to hunting by the Maori. There is a child's skull in a museum somewhere with markings on the back and front near the eye sockets. Originally, archaeologists believed it to be linked to violence or sacrifice, until they discovered it matched the talons of the Haast seagull exactly, and that it had been discovered in a pile of bones similar to the piles left by modern birds of prey. Kid was about 6 and got bird snagged. That's absolutely terrifying. At any moment a bird can swoop down and grab you by the face so hard that you'll see the marks in your skull. Then you hang there waiting to be taken to its nest and killed. It's quite possible that the bird would break the prey's neck when swooping. Falcons often do kill prey with a neck break, while eagle/accipitrids usually constrict until the prey is too weak to fight. Archaeologist here. There's a really interesting ancient Egyptian story called The Shipwrecked Sailor, in which a man is washed ashore a beautiful island and is apprehended briefly by an enormous serpent. In the story, the serpent tells him that there used to be hundreds of others like him, but a falling star wiped them all out. I think it's unlikely that the Egyptians had knowledge of dinosaurs, but there's a site called Wadi Hittin that has thousands of ancient whale skeletons from the Eocene. I think it's possible they could have seen these skeletons and mistaken them for giant snakes. Herodotus actually tells similar tales of giant flying snakes in Egypt, and I suppose if you saw these skeletons but no trails, you might think they were capable of flight. Based on multiple descriptions of the Australian cryptid, the Bunyip, I firmly believe them to be seals who swam inland. The kraken were likely colossal squid which swam up to the surface. The black demon shark of Mexico is just a large great white with pigment issues. A colossal squid isn't likely to surface. Look at how few we have on tape. However, it is likely that they were seeing a dead body of one. We only have about 50 specimens of giant found, so it's entirely possible that they come much larger. I linked this in the description. Counterpoint, propeller noise may be driving them into the depths. Perhaps they used to attack ships in sailing days. I've got a few cryptozoology books that describe the Bunyip, and that's one of the more interesting cryptids for sure. The one thing that would separate them from common seals is that they are supposed to be quite massive, so I'm not sure if a misidentification of a seal would cut it for every sighting. I never heard of the black demon shark before, so now you've given me another cryptid to look up, so thank you. The Cyclopes of Greek mythology. Go Google up an elephant skull. There's this huge hole right in the middle of it looking to all the world like a single eye. Now add this to the knowledge that the Cretan dwarf mammoth left subfossil bones on Crete easily discoverable, was 1 meter at the shoulder, and could be more or less assembled into a giant humanoid. A rock could have been real. It was most likely inspired by the elephant bird of Madagascar. An elephant bat was like a big ass ostrich about 9 feet high. They didn't go extinct until the 16th or 17th century. For sure. Also, even a condor could appear and probably be misidentified as being twice the size it is if someone that wasn't familiar with it saw one in the wild. I forgot where I read this, but when people are afraid of something out in the wild, their accounts of it can make it out to be much larger than the real thing due to stress or fear. There's a small population of albino deer in my area and they are beautiful. Definitely ethereal looking, and totally match the European description of a unicorn. The mythical unicorn likely derives from travelers from Africa or Asia to Europe trying to describe a rhinoceros. There are Asian rhinos in India, Nepal, and Indonesia. When you consider that ancient Greek depictions of lions sometimes looked more like dogs, and that the word hippopotamus comes from Greek words meaning river horse, it's easy to see how a Greek traveler would describe a rhino as a one-horned horse. There's linguistic evidence for this idea. 400 years ago it was believed that there were two types of rhinos. Ones with two horns were called rhinoceros and ones with a single horn were called unicorn. So the word unicorn was used to describe both real rhinos and the mythical one-horned horse. It wasn't until zoology advanced as a science that unicorn came to refer purely to the mythical creature. There are still remnants of the original usage though. The genus of the scientific names for Asian rhinos, which have one horn, is Unicornus. The Wendigo probably existed, just not as a creature. People in the far north who survived a brutal winter by eating a family member had a psychological escape hatch for the guilt and horror by convincing themselves they were transforming into a ravenous murderous beast. They'd continue killing and eating in a hysteric delusion that they had no control over it. Wendigo hunters would then have to come and kill them and perform a shamanic ritual to assure the rest of the tribe that the taint wouldn't spread. It's actually an incredibly fascinating study into culturally specific mental illness. The lengths the mind will go to in order to avoid dealing with a traumatic event are so extraordinary that in that culture they would actually continue to murder and cannibalize fellow tribe members under the delusion they had transformed into a monster. There's a very fascinating, but very depressing, segment of cross-cultural legal studies that looks as Wendigo lore also as representations for other horrors, namely family violence and child sexual abuse. I don't have the book on hand, but I remember the introduction was a tale about a girl who is continuously bitten by a male family member. A female ancestor guides her to a riverbank that can treat her wounds with good medicine. But she either forgets or is hurt too many times that she gives up and ends up continuously biting her own daughter. Basically it tells the story of how abuse and pain can be passed down through families and how people you love can be both victims and monsters. I think the book was Mythical legal principles. 1. I believe that stories of wild men, giants, hairy bipeds and others are rooted in hunter-gatherer cultures which existed on the periphery of civilization as defined by early subsistence farmers. 2. King Arthur existed as at least one post-Roman warlord. King Arthur is likely based on Ambrosius Aurelianus, a very real Romano-Briton warlord who did fight against Saxons and other Germanics coming to Britain. Mons Badonicus / Mount Baden / Baden Hill, while never truly found or discovered, is incredibly similar in description to the Ringfort in Badbury, England. Arthur. From the legendary people side of things, King Arthur was certainly someone who actually existed, albeit in a much different form than modern audiences would be familiar with. The earliest mentions of him are as a historical British king who lived during the 5th century. He's in a king list. He's mentioned as winning a series of decisive battles against the Saxons, and his excellent swordsmanship is referenced once. And that's about it. During the Middle Ages, Arthur's tale was romanticized and then conflated with other myths and folklore. Several of his knights, such as Lancelot, were originally heroes of their own legends, before being added to his, until we finally ended up with our present version that has all the medieval knights and magic and the round table and the holy grail business. It's entirely possible that the name of Arthur itself was part of this later conflation, as his victories against the Saxons were also credited in some sources to a general named Ambrosius Aurelianus. Those sources may be wrong, or they may have been two different leaders who were mistakenly combined by later writers, a king and his general, perhaps. Among historians who support Arthur's historicity, the thinking goes that he was a Romano-British, i.e. Welsh, leader who fought against Saxon incursions and held them off during his lifetime, becoming ruler of part of Britain in the wake of Rome's withdrawal. His name would have originally been Roman Artorius, which became Arthurus in the Vulgar Latin, and was later shifted to Arthur by Celtic influence in the 6th century. Troy. The Trojan War is another legendary event that was certainly based on something real. We know Troy was a real city that was actually raised around 1190 BC, and we have a lot of evidence that says the Mycenaean Greeks and the Hittite Empire fought several conflicts over the city, which was a powerful city-state and vassal of the Hittites at the time. The Trojan War from the Iliad is either a legendary account of the most glorious Mycenaean victory in these wars, or perhaps a dramatization of the entire series of wars distilled into one mythical conflict. As for the people mentioned in the stories, though, no telling. Many were likely based on actual nobles from the conflicts, but Greek mythos has a habit of adding in later heroes to famous stories. Combined with the massive time gap before we inherit our earliest surviving copy of the story, at least some of the characters were probably added later. Serious scholarship tries to identify which parts of the Iliad are most guilty of this, and which parts most resemble its Bronze Age origins. My favorite thinking from the historicity debate on Troy is that the whole Helen situation was originally understood to be a metaphor for the actual transgression that the Trojans committed. Hittite letters suggest that they were the aggressors, but don't specify how. So we are left guessing about what sort of treaty violations or trade disputes that Helen might have been meant to represent. Alright, as a historian, giants. They exist in some form over many cultures and history. My favorite story is about a Native American tribes that told the story of the giants that killed them to near extinction generations upon generations ago, and how they were a horrible beast and quite large, all the characteristics of giant. Truth be told, and this is probably true of most legends / accounts of giants, that it's just a height relative thing. A majority of a population was quite small back in the day, besides being easier to hide and run. Less body mass meant less food needed and more chances of survival. But I digress. People were quite small, like average 5-footers and less. Anyone who was taller was probably considered a giant, and all whole tribe of giant people 5 feet 10 and above must have been especially terrifying when they were a warring tribe or just in conflict with you. So the generational story was just about a smaller height-wise tribe that encountered a taller height-wise tribe and they fought. The story of the giants. The natives have a lot of stories of supernatural creatures that were just odd to them humans. The pale-face beasts were probably Vikings. Vikings caused a whole migration of a tribe as well. It's really interesting in my field of work to just put things in perspective. You gain so much. I believe that Bigfoot probably does exist, or at least did until very recently. But I doubt that it was a unique species. My theory is that what people see is a mundane animal, probably a large brown bear with serious genetic deformities. Encountering a 7-foot bear with mange, maybe a deformed cranium, possible scars from fights with other bears, and other such traits would certainly trigger a fight or flight response. You see something like that, you haul ass in the other direction. When you stop, you're not 100% certain of what you saw, so your brain fills in the details. So you take a deformed animal and mix it with an imaginative mind that knows what the popular version of Bigfoot looks like, and you get a bona fide Bigfoot sighting. I feel this post is very similar to one a few weeks ago, but w/e my comment is the same. Camelopard. Described as having the print of a leopard, with this body with a camel, but an elongated neck and too many backwards horns. Nowadays referred to as a giraffe, many thought it was mythical in certain parts of the world. Changelings, babies switched out by faras, were probably an early explanation for birth defects. More likely autism. Children with autism seem to develop normally for 12 to 18 months, then suddenly change and become much more withdrawn and uncommunicative. You could easily believe that your kid had been stolen by the fairies and an imposter left in their place. Note that 12 to 18 months is also when kids get their immunizations, hence the vaccines made my kid autistic. Also may explain postpartum depression. Think about it in the olden days. After all, isn't a mother meant to naturally love and bond with their baby? Like automatically? So why am I not bonding with mine? Why do I feel like a failure of a mother? Oh, maybe the fairies came and took my actual baby away, and I'm protecting myself from the fairy magic. Well, I suppose existed is being stretched here, but many people until fairly recently were adamant that cyclopes existed. The evidence they used turned out to be the skulls/bones of dinosaurs or elephants. There's also evidence for King Arthur existing, but similarly to Moses, it seems to have been a dude that did some stuff, but later other big fish stories got attributed to him, and it just grew over time. Back then it was common to change the names of the folk hero so that the story itself would be remembered. Also dragons. Nearly every culture has a mythological giant lizard. In a way they're correct. Almost all of the evidence they gave turned out to be dinosaur bones/fossils. The banshee was never real, but lots of Irish parents came up with a story about a screaming woman that kept their kids terrified and in their beds. The banshee's woeful wail meant kids had to stay in bed or get stolen away. This story was told so that the parents in question could have sex. Loud sex. Because the kids would have heard THEIR*** mom's amorous moans and interpreted them as a ghostly call from beyond the grave. That's pretty funny, but you bring up a fantastic point that many people aren't aware of outside of cryptozoology. Many legends were shared and told to children and young adults to actually keep them safe from harm, which would have been of particular importance back in olden times when death from nearly anything was rampant and a serious concern. There are lake monster stories told to keep children safe from swimming out too far in lakes or even going near bodies of water in the first place, or even forest monster stories to keep them from going out too far and getting lost. There's even the old legend of the lambten worm in England, where I'm pretty sure it was told to children to keep them safe and cautious when being near or dealing with water wells. Those were deadly times back then, and folklore actually saved lives for sure. The problem was that the children would actually tend to keep believing these stories even into adulthood, so I'm sure that many legends in fact became real accounts in that way. A couple of guys from Haiti were telling me they can't swim. They liked swimming pools, but would just sit on the side or rarely go in the shallow end. I asked them why they didn't learn, and they said it was a story their mom told them about a half-fish woman that would drown you. It was a sort of backwards mermaid, ugly top, and woman's legs. Haiti has some seriously bad currents and steep ocean drop-offs. If you go even 100 feet from shore in some areas you are suddenly in mile-deep water. Makes sense to keep kids from swimming in that. Thank you for watching. This really was an interesting full of mysteries subreddit to dig into. Many more videos to come. So subscribe. Also it would help me out if you'd like the video so others can dive into this knowledge. Have a nice day.